Welcome to another episode of A Podcast. Your host, Stephen Maxted, and today we have Amber Craig, co-founder of Breaking Free Foundation today out of Alberta. Where you're Calgary?
In Calgary, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for making time today to be on. And Amber, I'm excited to get into today's episode. We got connected through a mutual connection here. And it sometimes feels like Western Canada is a big small town. In many ways, I know we talk about Winnipeg, Manitoba here being like a big small town in that way. It's either friends or friends of family or family itself. And I think the topic that we're going to cover today is super important, becoming more prevalent and discussed today. That personally, we actually have done some work through the marketing company and some stuff in areas like this, but I'm really excited to hear what you guys are doing out there and the services that you're offering. So without further ado, let me pass it over to you, Amber, and you give a little backstory on yourself and what you guys are involved with today, and then we'll get at it.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Breaking Free Foundation is a registered charity in Canada, but we operate our services within Alberta right now. We've been around for just about 10 years now, which is kind of crazy. And we exist to provide support for people that have been through traumatic life experiences or have PTSD. There's a few things that we do in that regard. We have a therapy grant program, which is a $750 grant that people can apply for, which gives them access to trauma specialized therapy in lots of different forms. And we have just about 500 approved trauma-informed therapists within Alberta, which is fantastic. And then we also do 2 free monthly support meetings. One of those is online, so anybody in Canada can access that one. That's just a little background on who we are and what we do.
That's fantastic. By the way, I think that's super cool that you guys offer even like a virtual option within there too to reach a bigger audience. I don't think that is as common as people might think in terms of accessibility. That's fantastic. I mean, obviously we can't take away from the in-person, but even we're able to connect today because of the digital era. So that's awesome that you guys have the same kind of mindset there in some capacity. Now, I think a question that might be on some people's minds as we're discussing this is like, hey, like, isn't this something that's offered in general in terms of, therapy that's already out there? But, maybe talk through a little bit about like, why is this needed? And, why isn't this something that's already kind of existed, in our current offering of services, we'll say, local to Canada? How is this different?
Yeah, great question. So I'll answer that in kind of 2 parts. So one being, why is this kind of needed? I think, awareness around trauma and PTSD is definitely improving, but I think there's still a lot of people that associate those words with veterans, for example, or really extreme situations that might pertain to that. It's actually like one of the most common experiences in Canada. So I know Statistics Canada just put out some numbers recently for 2024, but 63% of Canadians have experienced trauma in their lifetime. And that's just the reported numbers. So we can always assume it's slightly higher than that, but that's a very, very common experience that people have. So it certainly touches everyone in one capacity or another, whether you're supporting somebody going through it or you've been through it yourself. The difference with trauma therapy versus other types of therapy is that it's very specialized and there's a lot of nuance. The side effects that come with PTSD really need to be considered, and those are not considerations that you would find in a traditional therapy setting unless that therapist is trauma informed and trauma trained. Okay. PTSD is a specific diagnosis. There's also something called CPTSD, which is complex PTSD. Again, these are things that people are learning more about, but there are some nuances, and it is super important for somebody who's been through that to have a therapist on the other end of their interaction who understands the specific side effects that they're going through. If somebody has experienced extreme trauma in their lifetime and they're accessing therapy for the first time and that experience does not go well, they're likely not going to return, and that could cause further damage. So more and more people are getting trained in this type of work, which is great. What we do is very unique. So unfortunately, We hear from everybody that comes to us that we're the only group in Alberta that focuses on trauma and PTSD, and we actually get most of our referrals from the Alberta government health services. So they don't have the specialization in this type of thing necessarily. It's also very, very expensive, which is another barrier for people accessing treatment. Even if you have insurance coverage, there are certain types of trauma therapy like EMDR, which could be like $250 a session, and you might need 10 to 20 of those. So it can be inaccessible because of the financial barriers, and it's inaccessible because of the lack of specialization in that area. So there's a couple of reasons why this type of thing is really important.
A couple questions. What's EMDR though?
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I believe that's right. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert in it.
No, it sounds right. Sorry, I didn't mean to call you on that one. I hadn't heard of that before, but I have heard of some other treatments from folks I've met on the journey that have gone for, different, I think like different style, like stimulations, I guess ultimately is how I would word it. Sounds like it would be something similar to that. Interesting. Yeah. Now, how does someone know, I think there's some obvious ones that, as you mentioned, with like veterans and some, scene of more extreme combat style things, but how else would we categorize someone that may have like a PTSD, if that makes sense? Like kind of, how do we say it's trauma versus a bad experience? I know there's lots of nuances you kind of mentioned, but how do we draw the line and find out that something is kind of more trauma based than not? Where is it?
Yeah.
Where's the
good question? I think it really comes down to the emotional response and the side effects to any event. Some people will have a more stressful emotional response to something versus someone else. And some people might have had 6 or 7 traumatic experiences in a row and felt nothing, but then the next one kind of kicks off, a domino effect of their past. In Canada specifically, like the most common types of trauma that are being tracked with statistics would be things like motor vehicle accidents, experiencing chronic illness, or knowing someone who has it, going through death or grief, suicide, physical assault, sexual assault tend to be very, very common ones. Combat is actually very low on the list because it's a smaller population that will experience something like that. But there's kind of a lot of, common experiences that we can all relate to, like separation, divorce is another big one. There's lots of things that you'll go through in your lifetime that could be considered traumatic if your body and your brain has an emotional stressful response to that.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense in terms of what you just said there about car accidents. Those can kind of seemingly be, very traumatic, especially if there's a death within that situation. Back to kind of the more gory side of things there. But that's, interesting. Okay, so it's not just like you were saying, like what we would normally assume to be, like a big, so to say, situation there. Not always the case.
Like job loss is a big one. I mean, and something we can all relate to is, a global pandemic. So that was a global trauma that everyone has now experienced. So we can all check that off the list. We've all experienced something very traumatic together. And that impacted people for lots of different reasons. But it all comes down to how you respond to that. And when it comes to a diagnosis of PTSD or CPTSD, you would need to go see a psychiatrist to get a diagnosis. However, you don't need a diagnosis to treat something like that if you fall under the category of something like that. If it's important to you to get the diagnosis, then I encourage people to do it. But we work with lots of people who fit that box of having PTSD, but they haven't been formally diagnosed. And I don't think it's super important that you have a formal diagnosis if you feel like that's something that's important for you.
Interesting. I think that you're right, though, too. Something you said earlier on about, if people have a bad experience going to therapy, probably the first time, because there still I think that there is like a little bit of like a lingering faux pas on going to it, is kind of the undertow that I feel and pick up off some folks. But if you go and it's probably not good, then the likelihood that you go back is low, because it's probably low anyways in terms of how many folks do go and, I call it let their brain breathe a little bit through someone else is kind of my verbiage on that one. But you can kind of tell when some folks they're a little bit more usually at peace overall, and especially if they've gone through something dramatic, it's definitely encouraged. But so how does the foundation kind of work then within it? Just hear it from your words instead of me trying to summarize it. But how do you guys function within the system of, okay, like, so Alberta Health kind of has, they said they're sending people to you, and then you're connected with other professionals in this space specifically. What's that process look like?
Yeah. So for clients seeking support for trauma, if they're going through our therapy grant program, they fill out an application, and all that really is, like, there's no real parameters that we're looking for. It's just, we want to make sure that these resources are going to people who need trauma therapy and not just therapy in general, because it is very specialized. Right. We have a very extensive wait list right now, so they typically just get added to the wait list. Once they are approved, then they get approved for $750 towards any of our approved therapists in the program. And it's up to them to choose what that journey is for them, because not everything works for everybody. And so we have therapists that range from specializing in equine therapy with horses to traditional talk therapy. We have sound therapists, we have movement therapists, we have all kinds of modalities that work within the realm of trauma. The one thing they all have in common is that we've vetted them personally to make sure that they have specific training in trauma and PTSD, and that they're in good standing within their governing organization. And then we connect them directly with the therapist, and they go from there. And then if people are waiting for a therapy grant to come through, then that's why we offer our free support meetings that people can access. And obviously that's an immediate thing. It's not therapy, it's different. But I think for a lot of people that go through something traumatic, they feel like they're the only ones who have been through that, and it feels isolating. And for a lot of people, just connecting with other people that understand what you've gone through is an important piece of connection that they might be missing. So there is a lot of value in the support meetings as well. Very cool.
Now, this just popped in my head, maybe a little out of order for the flow, but so it's been around for 10 years. What was day one looking like back in the day? Like, why did it first come to be? I know you mentioned there's a small group of founders and you guys still work very closely together, but what was really the reason to get started?
Yeah, great question. So we actually started from a vision that Theo Fleury had, which I'm sure anyone listening to this knows who that is. So I don't really need to give a background on his legacy in the hockey world in Canada. But when he published his book, Playing with Fire, shortly after doing that book tour, he started a movement called the Victor Walk, which was a Canada-wide campaign to raise awareness about child sexual abuse. And that consisted of people running walks all over Canada, rallies, and people sharing their stories about child sexual abuse and the need for more awareness on it and things like that. So he did that in 2013. And out of that, that's how I became connected with him. I was running one of those rallies in Calgary at the time. We had connected online and then eventually met in person, and initially thought, let's do this all the time. Why do we need to wait for once a year to have this conversation? And so initially we were really focused on child sexual abuse because that was both of our backgrounds and how we ended up meeting. But after diving into that a lot, you learn that the side effects, whether it's child sexual abuse or adult sexual assault or physical assault or car accidents, like those symptoms and side effects are all the same. And so it became, let's not forget about this demographic. Let's keep the Victor Walk, but let's also create something that could support people in all types of trauma and make this conversation a little more common, because at that time it was, number one, completely unheard of for anybody to publicly say that they were a survivor of child sexual abuse. And it was definitely unheard of that anybody would be talking about trauma because that word wasn't being used very frequently. So, it's nice to see that a lot of work has been done on the awareness front in that regard, because I think both of those words are used way more frequently. But that's really how it came to be, is we just realized that there's so much more to deal with here. And obviously people who have been through a childhood trauma are still dealing with that trauma as an adult. And there's a lot more people that need support than just that group. So our charity still supports the Victor movement. It looks a little different each year, what we do with it, but that was the initial reason how we all got together.
Very cool. I love that. It's always interesting to find out how things got started in the evolution of any, I'll say, business, but any endeavor as a whole. So, I mean, ultimately, this is a business, and helping folks is the main goal. And you guys have a fantastic website. I know I was mentioned before we even got on here. If anyone's looking for resources, just we'll plug this at the end a little bit more. But there's a lot on here in terms of finding out more. And what you guys are kind of about. I think it's great the way that you guys have it broken down on here in terms of input, output, in terms of where money is going. I think that's something that's really interesting to see you guys publicly just slap that right on a nice bar or pie chart, I guess, rather, for everyone to see and kind of understand what those, because it doesn't just, not everything is free within running organizations like that. I know different volunteer things I've been involved with in the past, there's still costs associated with, you have like bookkeeping, little nuances that have to get covered. But that's really informative, and that's fantastic that you guys are doing that. Do you know, kind of, I don't want to put you on the spot with stats here, but how many folks have been impacted and helped throughout the journey to date, approximately?
Yes, I don't have it on the top of my head.
Maybe it's huge. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I was just scripting here like, oh, maybe because you've been from an early stage, so.
Yeah, we do like an annual report each year, which outlines like how many grants we do. And the thing is, like, it really varies by the year. And for us, we don't have any staff. Like, we don't have an office. We don't have any employees. We are 4 volunteers and a part-time bookkeeper that keep this whole thing afloat. So it's expensive to run a therapy grant program, but we don't have any other real expenses. So everything changes year to year based on the money that comes in. And for the most part, we survive off of private donations from people. So, some years we can put a lot of people through the program, and some years we put much less because there's just no money coming in. So it really varies. When it comes to overall impact, it would be impossible for me to ever know that number because of, so much of our awareness is really virtual. And like some people we've never even met in person that are connecting with our social channels or through the Victor movement, for example. It's certainly in the thousands. But for us, it's like one person at a time, because, it is $750 every time we put someone through. And we would love to put way more people through our programming and help a lot more people than we do now. But, it's varies year to year based on the money.
Oh, for sure. No, that makes a ton of sense. And especially been doing it this long, it's probably hard to keep track of what that mass volume looks like. I was kind of thinking, I'm sure it's been, as an easy number to say, like in the thousands based on just events alone. That might be an easier go-to. So sort of on the spot.
No, it's all good. Like, I'm not going to try to make it up, but it's definitely in the thousands. And then if anyone is interested, they could certainly go on our website and see our report that we publish each year, which has our specific numbers for the previous year. And to your point, we're very transparent about what we spend money on and how we receive our money. And as a registered charity, you can also access that information right on the CRA website. Any charity you can look up there. So I think that gives people peace of mind when they look to support it, that, we really don't have anything else to spend money on other than the programming that we do.
That's fantastic. And you guys cover the whole province pretty much. I saw the list of locations where you have folks to refer to. So it's not like you're but it's not like you're confined to Calgary where you're based out of. It's like you have spots all over the province.
All over the province. Yeah. And again, we also have a group of therapists who operate virtually. And to be honest, since COVID, pretty much every therapist will have a virtual option. And if you're licensed to work in Alberta, you can work anywhere in Alberta. So it is very accessible, whether you're doing therapy or you're doing the support meetings, because again, we have a virtual one and we have people that access that meeting from all across Canada. There's people in Quebec all the way to BC, and we've actually had some Americans pop into that as well in the past. So we do have physical therapists all over small towns, big cities, but anywhere in Alberta can access our services.
And you mentioned on that call, you have people from across Canada and maybe even like you mentioned from the States there, but how about other provinces like Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or even BC, I guess on the other side being neighbors? Can those folks access some of the stuff through you guys, or is it more focused on Alberta at this time?
Anyone can access it. I think it's easier for people in Alberta to hear about it because they might be hearing about it from their therapist or like seeing it online. But
Right.
anyone can access that from across Canada. And because of, the nature of our past Victor walks, we have traveled a lot with that. So we do have people that follow us all over Canada. So anyone can. We've had certainly people from other provinces, but it tends to be a lot of Albertans just because I think they hear about us easier.
Very awesome. What you guys have a page here on testimonials. What's maybe one of your favorite stories from the last period of time in terms of like success that you've heard back without, naming names or anything like that? Has there been, a top of mind success story that you could share with us where you guys have gotten some really positive feedback on changing someone's life?
Yeah, I would say kind of the unanimous feedback that we get from the therapy grant program, at least, is that it is life-changing for a lot of people. So I think it's hard to kind of narrow a specific story, but more than a few times we've been told that we're the only reason people are alive. The meetups can physically be a lifeline for some people if they don't have a network of people in their life that they feel they can talk to. We can kind of be the only safe space for them. So it is always very heartbreaking to read the applications that come in of the awful things people have been through and the lack of support they've received to this point. It's always very amazing to read what comes in after they finish a program or they come to a meetup. A very alarming trend that we've seen in the last couple of years is the number of family traumas that are coming to us. So like previously, before the last couple of years, it would be an individual reaching out looking for help. Now we get applications from parents for their entire household where something really bad's happened to a household. And we've got kids, from like 5 years old to 16 in a household that all need desperately help. So I think those stories, once they go through the program, can be very, very impactful to know that you were able to help an entire family on their healing journey. But I think it's a very common experience for somebody to come to us at the end of their rope, so to speak, very suicidal and feeling very isolated, and finding some semblance of support through our organization, which is incredibly emotional and rewarding for us. And when we get the opportunity to talk to those people face to face, it's the reason that we continue to do this, even though it's a stressful struggle for us to keep the doors open at times. But when we see these people share their stories of how they've got to the other side of something, it's very, very powerful.
Yeah, no doubt. That's interesting to hear that as a friend. I can only make some assumptions on what might have gone on in those scenarios, but what other kind of trends, I guess, to go down that path a little bit more, do you see in terms of patterns? I know I've heard stats on, maybe it's just because like my algorithm, like I'm a young male. So I see all this stuff on, men's mental health and stuff just because I check the box of that category for advertising too. So I see a little bit more of that stuff, but I also don't have a holistic view on maybe the entire population, but where are there kind of different categories of folks going through stuff that you see patterns in?
Yeah, I would say the other types of trauma seem like it's pretty consistent. I mean, one thing that has changed is we weren't getting referrals from other organizations before. So I think as much as the awareness about trauma is growing, the realization that there's a lack of trauma specialization is also growing. So we would never get a referral from Alberta Health Services in the past or a private clinic.
Right.
And now we see that all the time. Even addiction centers send a lot of people our way. So it's interesting to hear how people find us. And, a lot of people also just say that they Googled PTSD in Alberta and we're the only thing that comes up, which is really unfortunate. But it's like a double-edged sword because the more people hear about us, the more that people need our services, and then it becomes even more strained. But I think there's definitely just seems to be an awareness around the importance of trauma-informed care. And even for us as an organization with, trauma-informed therapists, like when we started our therapy grant program, it was tough to find any therapist in Alberta who specialized in that. I mean, now we work alone with almost 500 across Alberta, and there's plenty that we haven't even met yet. So I think the specialization on the practitioner side is also growing, which is very encouraging. But it's like any trend, like the more people learn about something, the more they can self-identify that might be something that they're dealing with. And then we see the numbers grow, right? Like if mental health conditions always grow in numbers every year, because I think more people will realize that that's something that they might be feeling, right?
Absolutely. You brought up an interesting point. I had jotted this down too, is how much overlap is there between substance abuse and where you guys kind of come in? Because I think some people self-medicate, as it were, whether that be with pharmaceuticals or recreation, whatever that may be, whether it be drugs or alcohol or whatever, substance-wise. But yeah, how close do you work with a lot of folks in that category? Or is there often overlap?
Extremely. So I would say not everybody that has a trauma has an addiction, but everybody that has an addiction has had a trauma. So we are of the mindset that trauma is the root cause and addiction is a side effect, just like depression is a side effect of something else, and anxiety is a side effect of something else. So we always like to ask, what happened, and why. And so I think that's why we get people venturing to even our meetups, for example, who go to a traditional sobriety program and they maybe have dealt with their behaviors, but they haven't really had a chance to talk about why those behaviors existed in the first place. And that's what we're all about. We're all about normalizing the conversation around traumatic experiences and what people have gone through. And there's no shame in those conversations, and everybody gets it. You don't need to have the same story as somebody else to understand exactly where they're coming from, because you might also have dealt with the same kind of coping mechanism, or you've had similar struggles with jobs or whatever that might be. So for us, there's a ton of overlap. We certainly get a lot of people with different types of addictions that reach out to us. But it's not always, people with addiction, I would say, are dealing with trauma. Not everybody that has PTSD is struggling with an addiction, but that's kind of the relationship that we see.
Interesting. What would be the most common, I don't know if you would notice that, like substance that is abused within folks that are dealing with trauma?
I don't know Canada-wide. I would say the people that we deal with, I think alcohol is a common one. We do tend to have people that have love or sex addiction as well. Opioids obviously is a big conversation across Canada right now, as to the rising number of overdoses there, and the rising number of dangerous drugs that are, that the unhoused population are dealing with. So I don't have the stats on that Canada-wide handy, but just in terms of the people that reach out to us, it's a lot of alcoholism that we see. Yeah.
Kind of think that might be the case, but I wanted to ask. Maybe it's something I haven't heard of, or that. Now, in terms of treatments, and I only know this, so hopefully this doesn't come off as a dumb question, but in terms of treatment, I've heard and watched some documentaries in terms of using substances to help deal with PTSD and other things. I don't know how common this is, but I've heard different things along the lines of using different mushrooms, or even, I don't know how this is categorized, but like ecstasy, I think, is one that has been used in documentaries. Yeah, and kind of, again, we'll call it letting the brain breathe a little bit differently, but in terms of letting go of some traumas, I don't know, this is on like Netflix and stuff, so I'm not super well versed. I'm not an expert in this, but are there things that exist like that for treatments today locally? Is that becoming common, or is this,
Definitely growing. I mean, certainly in Alberta, we're aware of quite a few. We actually are partnered with several clinics in Alberta that offer psychedelic assisted therapy. It's not like we don't push any one particular type of treatment, because it's everybody's personal journey. And there's also a lot of fear, I think, around using psychedelics when people have come from an addictive background, for example.
Right.
There is a lot of research around ketamine therapy that's certainly becoming more popular in Alberta.
Right.
There's more and more clinics and research clinics opening up with that. Psilocybin, as you mentioned, is also something that has been widely studied, but there's lots of plant psychedelic medicine out there that I am totally not an expert in, but if anyone is interested in that, they could go to our website and just search psychedelic, and you would see all of the clinics that have labeled that on our directory that work in that, and they could kind of reach out to them. They're definitely the experts, not me, but it's absolutely something that has popped up in the last kind of like 3 to 4 years, where people are sort of curious to understand that, because exactly to your point, there's a lot of documentaries coming out, and I think it's becoming more mainstream to be talked about. So people are curious, and all of those groups are certainly specialized in trauma. That's how we know about them, and they've got lots of research handy that they could share with anybody who's interested.
Interesting. No, I think it's just, it's something that I've kind of witnessed. I'm just scrolling on the website here to see if there's an exact spot you would know this. We'll include all the links in here. Now I'm just getting a little distracted while I'm here, but it is pretty interesting to me to hear, I guess, about those other opportunities. But to your point too, it's kind of, you're leaning off maybe kind of an addictive tendency on one end to perhaps try something that would replicate or emulate a similar style response in a way. So it becomes a little bit of a tricky balance, but that's why there's experts in those fields doing that. As far as that started. Do a lot of folks that have success, I guess, through the program become donors back or get involved with you guys to help at events and stuff? Or what's that cycle look like within the program itself?
Yeah, we've had a lot of luck with growing our family that way. I think pretty much unanimously, everybody that's joined our group, either as a volunteer or a board member or a donor, had some success, and they're trying to find a way to give back. So we've been really, really lucky in that regard. I think people are keen to help out once they've experienced it.
Very awesome. That's great to hear. As far as that goes, that is a tight knit. What kind of events do you guys have coming up in the next, we're recording this in we'll call it early spring. Still winter time here, but we're looking forward in the year 2025 here. What kind of events can we look forward to seeing from the team and hosted and people can get involved with?
Well, we have a golf tournament every August that we put on in Calgary. We're still sorting out the details on that, but that'll be on our website as soon as we nail that down. We also are hoping to plan 2 to 3 poker tournaments coming up. So we're in a particular tough spot financially, so we're constantly kind of brainstorming, and it is tough for us because we are only 4 volunteers and everybody has a full-time job. So we do as much as we can, but I think we're keen to explore any kind of events that other people think would be a good fit for us. We've certainly encountered people that do fundraisers on our behalf. So I think that's something that I'll throw out there that we're interested in. But in terms of what we specifically put on, it's a poker tournament and it's a golf tournament for sure. And we're hopeful that we can do a lot more outside of that.
Awesome. It looks like there's like an easy kind of donate button. I think
yes.
That's what I saw creeping on the website here, where there's like a minimum $5 donation, something like that.
Yeah, we started a campaign a few years ago called Fiverr for a Survivor. And it was just, the mindset that, people always think that donating can be really cumbersome and expensive. But like, if you think of, instead of buying a $5 coffee, you could just put $5 towards helping someone. Like, those little amounts of money really add up. And we do survive on that. So we don't have access to any kind of consistent funding or government funding. So, and we recently had to make the tough decision last month to cut off our wait list for our therapy grant program, because we hit 300 people, and without any consistent funding, we're still, spending resources each month processing people that don't have access. And, at this point, we need to raise $225,000 just to clear that wait list, never mind the hundreds of people that will immediately fill it up again. So, we get, sometimes I open the mail and there's like change from like a kid's lemonade stand or something. And that's amazing. Like, every little bit truly does help us. And again, because we don't have a lot of overhead, that goes immediately to someone who needs it. So we're
Right.
very open to all kinds of creative fundraising things that if people want to partner with us on, we're really open. We're flexible, but it's very inexpensive to make a big impact.
Very awesome. Now, other ways that folks might be able to find you guys, as I've spent some time looking at this, is there are other social medias that you guys are on. Like I scrolled through here, and it looks like you guys are pretty active across. We had email, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. In terms of getting updates, if someone is following the journey, they can follow you on social medias as well, and see a little bit more from the story there.
Yeah, and I think one thing we always are really consistent with is sharing resources. And updated resources on trauma. So if you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, you'll get lots of access to resources there. The other thing is that we launched a podcast last year, which is it's just me interviewing therapists in our network about the different types of therapy that exists and also the different types of trauma. So if people are looking to understand about a very specific experience, like we had an episode last year about like maternal narcissism trauma, which was totally new to me, and I learned a lot, but this is a whole demographic of people. So there's episodes on Spotify and YouTube there, which have turned into little resources for people and quite honestly, conversation starters for our meetings now. If people, people want to discuss the latest episode and learn more about it. So that's another resource that we try to keep available to people to access when they can't access our therapy right now.
No, podcasts are fantastic for, our own right now.
Yeah.
In terms of, I listen to them all the time, like outside of our own that we produce and stuff. It's like, I'm forever listening to different things and learning. I referenced a couple things that I've taken off of either documentaries or podcasts out of general curiosity. I think that's fantastic that you guys have gone down the path of producing that and sharing those stories. In that way. What was the one that you just mentioned there? The topic that I'd never heard of that before.
Yeah, maternal narcissism.
Okay. Can we dive down that for a sec? What's that all about?
It would be narcissism from a mother figure. So, and how that can relate to trauma from the person on the other end of it. So, and that's a very specific thing, but that's the nice thing about that concept for a podcast is like, you're never going to run out of things. And we listed a bunch of types of trauma at the start of this conversation, but there's honestly like anything could be a traumatic experience. So it's great that there's so many people who can provide perspective on it, and also just teaching people about different types of therapies that exist. And even therapists that we work with, they'll listen to the podcast and think, I should actually get trained in that because I didn't know about that. So I think it's really educational for the community just to understand that there's more than just talk therapy, and talk therapy is great, but not everything works for everybody. And there's lots of paths to go down that you can choose. And there's also lots to learn about how all kinds of different experiences can impact your mind and your body. And even for me, like every episode I'm sitting there like, okay, this is mind blowing. Like, how did I not know about this? There's never going to be a time to kind of stop learning about things like that.
No, definitely. Like I said, the verbiage you just used to describe that, I'm like, wait, what did you say? Like, what is this?
Yes. Yeah.
I feel like we would be a very early stage, and I'm sure it's always eye-opening for you on episodes to hear from experts in the space. What's another example of an area that you hadn't heard of before, besides getting on an episode with someone?
There's things that like types of trauma that I haven't personally experienced. Like we've had a couple episodes on racial trauma, for example, or trauma experienced by people who specifically move to Canada from other places. And that was really informative for someone who hasn't been through it personally, to kind of understand other people's perspectives and how to approach people in my circle who have been through that. Different types of therapy that I've actually interviewed a couple people and then ended up booking appointments with them because I'm like, I've never heard of this. Like we had a trauma movement specialist on and I didn't know what that was. And I was very curious. So I went and had a few sessions, and there's lots of things like that where sometimes I don't even want to do too much research ahead of it because I really want to be in discovery mode during the conversation of teach me like I know nothing, because I don't know anything about a lot of things. Like there's just so many. I think we've done 34 episodes, and they're each very specific. Everything from like dissociation to the physical symptoms of trauma. We've got a couple that just came out about addiction specifically and trauma. Very informative. It's super helpful for me too, it's always helpful for me to understand what other options are out there and have some perspective, because I don't have the same story as everybody that I come across in our meetings or our community, but it's helpful for me to understand what somebody might have kind of been through. So I find it very interesting. And hopefully other people find it interesting too.
Oh, for sure they would, especially on very like niche topics. I think it's fantastic you guys have gone down that path of also sharing other experiences, because I think by default you may have some success having people even just realize that they've had a life experience that falls in one of these categories, versus thinking that they're alone or isolated in a sense. So I think that's a huge plus on top of what you guys are offering for folks to go for, additional help. And yeah, that's fantastic. 34 episodes in, you're just getting started, but that's also a huge task of getting 34 under the belt too. We've been there. I remember at different points, but that's wonderful. So we'll definitely include the links in here for the elephant in the room. Real conversations with therapists on trauma. I think that's a wonderful initiative for you guys to be working down too. So is there anything else that you want to cover, Amber, specifically? We could keep chatting for a bit, but I'm good here. I was just going to add some shout outs for links on where to go, but I'll just blank ask you if there's anything else you want to add in.
I don't think so. I think we kind of talked about everything, and just we're not accepting new applicants for the therapy grant program right now, but that will change as soon as funding changes. So hopefully it does, and then we can put more people through the program. But that's why we're doing all these other things to try to give access to support while we don't have that program running.
Awesome. That's fantastic. We'll include all the links for social medias in here below, but one of the best things to go is probably to the website as a resource here. So reikifreefoundation.ca ultimately is the link that we'll include here as the main resource. And thank you very much for making time, Amber. I think this is awesome what you guys are getting into. And we're excited to share the story, I guess, of the foundation here, and continue to be connected. So
thank you so much for having me on. I always appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of what we do.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Amber.
Yeah, thank you.